Hey everybody, thank you for watching True Crime Time. Really excited about tonight's show. It's my first ever guest on a live, so I'm really looking forward to this. But what do you think, everybody? Another year in jail for Brian, no bail. Haven't heard anything from the defense pushing to get their innocent defendant out of jail. So he'll sit there for another year while we wait for the trial. More to come on that. We'll talk more about that. But I want to welcome my guest to the show. This is Daniel from the Drunk Turkey Show. Super excited about having you. Thank you so much for joining, Daniel.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited. I've been excited to join your channel here. I didn't know I was your first guest. I'm honored by that. Thank you.
Yep, first guest, and I appreciate you inviting me to your show. I've done 2 appearances on your show, and we've had a chance to talk backstage a few times. Which we agree on quite a few things, but there's a few areas where maybe we have a different opinion and we see things a little bit differently based off of what we've heard or evidence that we've seen or things we've read. But for the most part, we're on the same page about our opinion in regards to Brian's guilt. And I'm really looking forward tonight to going over some of these warrant findings and some of this evidence with you, and just kind of discussing it and getting your thoughts and sharing some opinions.
Sounds like a plan, man.
And then we'll keep an eye on the chat. And as we go through each topic here, we'll definitely call out some of the comments and see if we can answer some questions. So I'm going to jump right in. Let me get my screen up here, and I'm going to pull up this first warrant. Wrong one here. Let me... Bear with me, guys, here. I'm going to start with Brian's warrant. I figure when they raided Brian's parents' house, they took Brian into custody right away. So they would have been collecting his items, probably down at the police station as they transported him. But things in his pockets, they would have grabbed right then. So we'll start with Brian. And then we'll move on to the car briefly, and then we'll jump into the things that they discovered at Brian's parents' house. And Daniel, there are a few things there that I'm really interested in getting your thoughts on how you interpret kind of the way they were listed. So okay. Let me just grab the right tab for us. Okay, so this is what they would have collected from Brian as they were taking him into custody. Not a lot. It was the middle of the night here, late at night. So the first thing on the list here is we have one Defiant silver flashlight. So it looks like Brian was wearing, a pair of black shorts, a white shirt, black hoodie, black socks. He had some size 13 Nikes on that were black and white. He definitely has a lot of black clothing because they did collect those items from the house as well. But that's not to say anything that's unusual. A lot of people like dark clothing and, things like that. So I think it's more relevant when we talk about the clothing that was collected and the possibility that they could find hairs or other fibers and things on those clothes that could have gotten mixed up on things. But so he was wearing all black, a white shirt, and he's got a flashlight in his pocket. And then he has 4 medical style gloves. What do you think, Dan? Is that common, do you think, to have medical style gloves in your pocket?
I mean, it depends. I'll be honest. I have a box of medical gloves here at my house, and it's not very often you're going to find a pair in my pocket. But if I'm doing certain things like outside and, cleaning up certain stuff, yeah, they might be in my pocket. But in the middle of the night, probably not so much. He was apparently separating his trash. So he might say just because he didn't want to get, icky stuff on his hands that was in the trash, that might be his reasoning behind it.
Agree. We've all heard that, kind of rumor that he was putting his trash into baggies and he was wearing gloves when they took him into custody there. Do you think that's legit? Do you think he was placing his trash into bags? And why do you think he would be doing that?
Well, he had just gotten stopped a couple of times, coming from Pullman to Pennsylvania. So, even though it may not have been orchestrated, he doesn't know that. He may think that they're onto him, so he might be trying to pull every last resort, so to speak, to evade capture.
Yeah,
Um,
I
I don't
agree.
think
Yeah,
it's. I don't know how. I don't know how smart it is. I mean, you're trying to hide your DNA in a place full of people that have your DNA. I mean, a match through a family member would have been just as good to get a warrant for his DNA. So, it's more than just the separating of the trash. We also find out that he's putting trash in neighbors' bins, right?
right,
So I think
right.
that aspect also has to be brought in.
Yeah, a lot of behavior that occurs after the murders, right? And I'm sure they had eyes on him quite a bit, is at least as much as they could once they were onto, who he was, and were, they knew he was their suspect. There was surveillance being done. And that was something else I wanted to mention, coming up here in regards to the vehicle, that I wanted to get your thoughts on, because it sounds like they were watching Brian after he had arrived in Pennsylvania, and they saw him traveling around town. But there is something interesting in the description of what they described in regards to the vehicle that I want to share with you in just a minute. So, but back to what they had on Brian, just, kind of typical stuff you would be wearing in the middle of the night: shorts, a t-shirt. He's got a hoodie on. Now, what about the flashlight? Now, I've heard, some thoughts on, these Defiant flashlights, and, this theory that these UV rays can maybe kill DNA, and things like that. Do you think this was just a regular flashlight that he had in his pocket, or do you think there's something else to that, and it could be part of his kind of cleanup kit in regards to his gloves, having the gloves and the flashlight? Was he kind of in cleanup mode at this point, or do you think this is just a regular flashlight?
I'd be just speculating, but I think that if he was going from one house to another to dispose of his trash in different bins, I believe the area had larger lots. So I think he'd have to travel a little bit further away than, somebody who lives in a bigger city where their neighbor is practically on top of each other. This area wasn't like that. So if he was, in fact, which I do believe that he was. I know a lot of folks might say, "Hey, I want to see a video of this or see a video of that." I don't think they understand how things work. Videos don't come out until court, and
Right.
just because people are saying that they haven't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Well,
Agreed.
anyways, somebody going to, the neighbor's house in the middle of the night. It's a wooded area. I mean, there might be animals out there. It's December-ish, so I'm not sure how the wildlife is out in that area of Pennsylvania. But you know, I can see him, utilizing a flashlight to do that. As far as trying to destroy evidence with a flashlight, that's the first I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, I've heard of, kind of it being tossed around how UV lights can degrade DNA. I don't know if it's true or not. It's just, one of those things you hear when people are kind of, the rumors, even the rumor about him putting the trash into the bags. There's no official document, right, that actually says that. And so we may have heard it depending on the source. More to come
To our
later.
knowledge.
Yeah, it may be valid, but as far as what's officially been released, it doesn't necessarily show that. I'm interested to see the body cam footage that comes out right when they've executed these warrants, and kind of how that went. Hopefully we'll get to have eyes on that at some point, as well as those traffic stops. But
I don't think there was body cams involved in the arrest
no,
of Brian Kober.
yeah, it was probably FBI most likely. Do you think?
It was FBI, and I know some people will say, "Hey, well, there was this, implementation that they needed to use body cams, and it
Mhm.
had just been implemented FBI across the FBI. I think a couple of months before, maybe 4 or 5 months prior to the incident or to the arrest.
Yeah.
And when it comes to those type of things, like when it comes to like body cams, those have to be issued out, and those are issued out by places of importance where you would most likely think you would need one. So
Mhm.
you're looking at some of your major bigger city areas that are going to get those first. And in those policies, it's probably more like when available type of thing. And when you look at Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, small area, middle of the Pocono Mountains, I don't think that their nearby FBI headquarters is one that usually is performing these type of warrants and things of that nature. So I'm not too surprised. Also, I think I read in another article that somebody had spoken with the police department, a local police department there, and they didn't have body cams at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't even a situation where it was different for Bryan Kohberger than anybody else. You know, I think it would be more suspicious if there was no body cam for Bryan Kohberger and there was body cam for others before and or after Bryan Kohberger's arrest. If it's all the same, then you can't really say there's something suspicious about it. You can't say that, you know, you can't use something that doesn't exist as an evidence of some sort of foul play.
Yeah. And everybody, for those who haven't seen Daniel's show, the Drunk Turkey Show, you have to check it out. Daniel does have a background in law enforcement, so he has some really interesting insights when it comes to the processing here and kind of how the investigation was handled. So I always enjoy bouncing ideas off of him and getting his feedback. So, but be sure to check out his channel and support him if you haven't found him yet. Really good stuff. He puts on a really good show.
Thank you.
So, yeah, you know, I don't think it's too unusual. They caught Bryan in the middle of the night. So let's jump over to his car. Let me, you know, run through that really quick. I think like the car, like his clothing, it's not going to be very telling. I think at this point, he'd probably cleaned up the car quite a bit, and, you know, there was limited evidence to be found. Now, they did disassemble it and tear it apart for the most part. So more to come. We haven't heard the findings yet on, you know, what they've discovered in the warrant from what they got from his vehicle. But one comment actually came up, Daniel, while we were on your live, and it was in regards to the shovel being found in his car. And somebody asked the question, you know, is it true that a shovel was found in his car? And there was a shovel found. I don't necessarily think that's unusual, especially since he lives in a place where there's weather and you know, carrying a shovel in your vehicle is not that uncommon. And then, you know, aside from that, the other items in his vehicle here are pretty standard. You know, nothing jumps out. Now, you know, more to come on.
Well, I got a question for you then. Where do you think he's taking his Hyundai Elantra that he's off-roading and needs a shovel?
I don't necessarily think he's off-roading, but I live in a place where there's weather. And in the wintertime, it's not uncommon to have a shovel with you because you can get just stuck on a slick spot. If you have a driveway that's sloped, I'm just saying, I'm now, could he have used it? Could there be evidence on it? Could, you know, there could be dirt,
I think it'd be interesting to see what type of, if any type of residual, I don't want to say evidence because it's not evidence of anything, but evidence of something, whether it was dirt or snow. Now, I can see, you know, snow being something that you would use a shovel for, but if there's like a lot of dirt on this shovel, you know, I don't really recall a lot of people driving through a lot of dirt roads through Pullman or Moscow. I don't really recall those things, and I don't really think you're going through many if you're on the highway from Pullman to you know, the Poconos. Now, obviously, he could have gone and done some things. You know, he could have, for all I know, he could have gone and dug random holes in places just as a hobby. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't say he's a murderer. I'm just kind of curious as to what was on that shovel. You know what I mean? If anything.
I agree. I mean, there could be more, right? If there is more to it, if they find dirt and they can match that dirt to a location and that leads them maybe to evidence, for sure. I just, you know, I think it could also just be kind of normal, you know, vehicles type stuff. And I think for the most part, he would have tried to have disposed of the evidence that he had. But sometimes I go back and forth, you know, because they do, as we'll go through the warrant here from the house, there is some items in there that they found that I wonder, you know, especially when you talk about like the motherboard and the hard drives and things that he have, could he have potentially taken those things with him? Or, you know, was he in the mindset of, I'm getting rid of everything, right? And by now he's dumped it all. I'm really curious about that, right? I'm curious how, was he completely sloppy and he held on to things, or did he actually get rid of everything? And so, well, more to come, I guess, right, with the evidence. But he did have a shovel. Other than, you know, we have swabs, a Ziploc bag with a pink zipper, some change, another plastic bag with a green zipper. So we have 2 bags, his registration, some hiking boots. Now that'll support his alibi, right? That he was out hiking. He's got a hotel key, maybe from the drive out. They were on the road for probably about 40 hours. So they may have stayed overnight. Goggles, floor mats, not too unusual. Goggles, and then they took the floor mats. They would have taken those to process. We have a reflective vest, some water bottles, a wrench. They took the door panels, the seats, and the seat cushions out. They would have taken out the headrests, the seat belt, the visor. Interesting. They have fiber listed there. What do you think that is?
Probably some, fiber left on the fabric of the seat. He had one of the he didn't have the top of the line Elantra, so he had cloth seats and stuff like that. So those type of seats would typically grab onto things like that. If not, obviously, plastic's not placed or seat covers aren't on top of them.
Yeah, probably just something they want to look into further, I think. Now I do think the brake pedal and the gas pedal could be valuable. If we've heard of footprints and latent footprints, and if there were something on the bottom of his foot and he didn't cover the pedals, possible, but brake pedal and gas pedal were taken, so they'll be looking for anything on those. A phone charger, band-aid, a wrapper, maps, documents, and then the seatbelt boot also, I think, is interesting. That the seatbelt boot is, I believe that's what the belt rolls into, if I'm correct on that. And so they'll take that out completely and go through that for any evidence they can find. So, I've heard people say in comments and things like that, they didn't find anything in his car. Well, they haven't announced that they've found anything in his car. We don't know yet, right? We don't know the results of some of these tests.
Right now, the phase in which we are in, as far as the courts go, is the phase in where the defense is trying to get things thrown out. They're in the phase where they're trying to argue certain things. We're not in the phase where the prosecution is showing their hand. And so when it comes to the defense being the only group that's showing, maybe not their hand, but arguing their side on certain pieces of evidence that they don't agree with. And we also have to put into context, there's obviously, they're not going to argue the stuff that is unarguable. Like, for instance, if they found the receipt for the K-bar knife, right? We're not going to hear Ann Taylor bring that up right now. She's not going to be like, oh, you guys have a receipt for a K-bar knife that my client purchased. We're not going to hear that. Obviously, that's not going to come until trial. So everything looks like one way, you know what I'm saying? But when you break down exactly what is they're arguing, it's pretty weak.
Yeah, I agree. So again, his body, not too much on his person, his vehicle, I think more to come on the results. They may not find anything. He may have been cautious enough to prevent any transfer of any evidence, but he did make a mistake. He made multiple mistakes prior, but after the fact, we don't know yet. We'll definitely learn more as more evidence comes to light. Somebody here said, Richie says, we would have known if they had found something in his car. I don't know. I don't know if they would announce that at this point. They're only now everything that we're seeing is redacted, and they're only releasing just enough to where they can support their probable cause in their pursuit of Brian as a suspect. And so the things that we get exposure to are kind of the legal pieces that, are they're just kind of giving us enough to where we can say, okay, this person's sitting in jail, for years with no bail, and there's valid evidence behind that, right? In addition to other things, but we're not seeing everything. These are pieces of the evidence overall, from what they have.
Well, to address if they would have found something in the car, what have we learned that's been publicly put out there, or any of those things that's happened since Bryan Kohberger's arrest from the police? Is there anything? Has the police come out and said, hey, we have the receipt? And I know that got, leaked out, but, has anything else come out?
But, I mean, not since the gag order
police
was in place, right?
So the other thing is too, like, the only thing we would know is everything leading up to his arrest, because that's on the probable cause affidavit. His his vehicle wasn't searched or looked into until after his arrest. So we honestly have no idea what they may or may not have found inside there. The only
Yeah.
thing that we do know or assume is that Ann Taylor, and she uses some specific words, says that there's a total lack of evidence or DNA in the car,
Mm-hmm.
right? And does a total lack mean completely all? You know what I'm saying? Because I have to take what she says with a completely box of salt. When she was throwing out this exculpatory stuff here recently in court, and what she says was screaming out exculpatory was the fact that there wasn't any video of Bryan Kohberger leaving Moscow, Idaho through I-95.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, Detective Payne testified, and you can look on a map. There's multiple ways to get around that. And you would assume that the person that committed this crime, that went through the planning that they went through to commit this crime, to not leave their DNA behind on a body or evidence of their, being there outside of, the knife sheath. Mm-hmm. You would assume that he would have also surveyed the area for surveillance. And, there was cameras all up in that area. Why would he drive through there? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And it, again, it's one piece that they're focusing on, kind of look over here when everything else is going on over here, in regards to the evidence. The defense that's what they're supposed to do. They will stare evidence against their client in the face and tell you it's not true. That's their job. No matter, how damning the evidence is, they're going to stand there and say, hey, Bryan Kohberger is innocent, or they don't have any evidence. Literally, and then in the next hearing, they'll say they have a piece of evidence against Bryan and they're going to use it in the trial. Right. So they'll go back and forth, and I mean, that's what they're supposed to do, right? They're supposed to leverage the system. They're supposed to leverage every angle in the process in order to try to defend Bryan. And that's what you would expect. Really quick, I want to give a big thank you to Sissy, brand new YouTube member. Thank you for joining the precinct. We're actually going to be doing a members only live on Friday. It's going to actually be a sneak peek into a new segment that I'm going to be doing every week on my channel. So if you're not a member yet, join the precinct. There's some cool perks you get with that. You get a logo next to your name, and the longer you're a member, you kind of rank up. So it's kind of fun. And we'll be doing a monthly members only live. First one coming up this Friday. All right, so let's jump over to the House warrant. Now, there's a lot of items that were taken from the House here to go over. But there's a few interesting ones I just kind of wanted to call out and talk through with you and get your thoughts on. Let me just find the right page here. Just find the right tab. Here we go. All right. So right off the bat, right, the very first item on here. Now, I'm not saying it's the knife. Now, law enforcement has said, right, they've come out and they've said, they didn't have the knife, but they don't necessarily have to tell us if they did and tell us the truth. But we have the first item here, and it just says knife. And, later on in the warrant, you have other knives that they took. And, we have a Smith & Wesson pocket knife described, in detail. It's a Smith & Wesson brand. It's a pocket knife. And then you have another, I believe it's the Taylor cutlery knife in a leather sheath that they discovered. So they also described that other knife in detail with a description. But for whatever reason, this first item, they just write knife. Do you think there's any significance to that? I mean, and why wouldn't they have taken every knife in the house? Right. I mean, a warrant, they're going in and they're looking for specific things, specific evidence and relation, that's related to the case. And so there's, obviously knives are things that they're looking for, but not necessarily like they're not going to go into the kitchen and take every knife out of the butcher's block and seize that. Right. But for whatever reason, they took this knife, they took the Smith & Wesson pocket knife, and they took the Taylor cutlery knife. But
what makes you think he had other knives?
Well, now it could be his parents, right? This is from his parents'
Oh, this is
house.
from his parents' house? I thought it was from
Yes.
his apartment. I can't
No,
read
no.
that, man. It's too small.
Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry. I was kind of assuming that maybe you.
No, I can't see it.
Okay,
Oh,
so
okay.
first item here, yeah, is it's the knife. You know, there's or
Okay.
not the knife, but it just says knife. But you can
That-
see, you know, item 5 is Smith and Wesson pocket knife in
Now,
you know
it's
detail.
possible that this is the stuff that was in his room or possession.
Agree, yeah. But why would they just write knife?
I don't
Why
know.
would why wouldn't it be, you know, fillet knife? Maybe from when he was a fisherman, or you know, hunting knife, or knife with wooden handle. Why does it just say knife? That's just jumped out to me ever since this document was released, and I wanted to bounce that off of you and see if, I mean, it's unusual, right? Why isn't there more description there?
Yeah,
Is
I
it?
mean, I would assume that there would have been some more description. I don't think it's anything nefarious. I just think it's,
Mhm,
somebody having to write down a bunch of stuff and
mhm.
probably going really, really fast and just wrote knife.
Yeah, it just makes me. It could be. It could be. It just makes me wonder. Like, is it the knife, right?
Yeah.
But
And then, I mean, this is from Pennsylvania, right? So these are the guys that don't
yes,
know what's going on, right? They don't know, that they're looking for a K-bar knife. These are
no,
the guys. These are the guys that are doing the warrant. These are the guys that pulled in and grabbed the stuff, right? They don't have all the information that Moscow has, so they only have certain amount of information, and they might have even the probable cause affidavit, but the persons that are actually doing the warrant, like for instance,
mhm,
when I was in law enforcement, if I was on this call, it would literally be like, hey, they would call me up. We have a felony warrant at this location. They might brief us on certain things. We'll probably meet up somewhere and get a briefing. And they might say, hey, this is the person. He's Brian C. Koberger. This is who he's alleged to have committed a quadruple homicide. He's
mhm.
considered armed and dangerous. The murders were committed with a fixed blade object, with a knife. And
Right.
so when they go in there and they find a knife in his room, they may not know whether or not it's the knife or a knife, or it may not even be a K-bar knife, but they may not want to be too descriptive on it, just because if it is the murder weapon, this might, this is going to be public possibly. And so I don't know, it might be something you don't want out there publicly, but that's the only thing I can think of, to be honest with you, is the fact that they just weren't aware of
Mhm.
which, what kind of knife it was. I don't know if these officers were following the case. They may have just said, hey, this is the guy that committed a quadruple homicide, considered armed and dangerous. This is a layout of his house. This is where we're going to go through. This is where you're going to enter. This is what you're going to use. I mean, like the background behind everything really isn't necessary for the officers executing the warrant, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah, they're
And
told to look for any knife, essentially, right? So
exactly.
any type of knife they're going to seize. I
Right.
would think though that they would, in their process, right? They're in regards to, like, because I think you and I were chatting about the Reed case and the way that law enforcement handled some of that evidence, right? And so when you talk about kind of sticking to the process and doing it the same way every time, right? You would, again, I'm just throwing it out there. We would think there would be more descriptors there, especially the fact that they described other knives in detail. So it's just that one. I don't know. I don't know if they have a knife or not, but
No, I don't think they do. There hasn't been a well, what is it? I think it was, geez, where was it? I'd heard it on one of these programs. I remember who they were talking to, but they had not yet found the knife, is what from what I understand. They haven't
yeah,
found it
that's
yet.
what they've said. Yeah, they've said that. But they don't have to tell us. They don't have to tell us the truth on. They can protect the case however they want. I would be very surprised if he held on to the knife, right, and took it with him back to Pennsylvania. That would be shocking. But there are other items in this warrant that are interesting as well. Now, they did take a computer tower from his apartment. They took that, but we don't know what was inside that tower, if there was even a hard drive in it. That he may have removed the hard drive, and they did find multiple drives. And I agree with you. I think some of these items were in his room with his belongings and looked like, or some other, ownership, there, that they knew this was his stuff, that they took these items, and they're looking for any type of drives that they're going to seize from the house. Even family members, they can look through those devices as well. But they take quite a bit of evidence from the house. They take, a couple laptops, I think a regular PC, they take a motherboard, they take a 1 terabyte hard drive. So multiple items they take in regards to digital evidence that they'll be going through. Whether they found anything or not, again, we don't know. But so we see here a Seagate Barracuda 1 terabyte Samsung solid state drive, and then there's another. This is another 500 gig drive here below this black box Samsung. So multiple drives that he had on him. Not necessarily in relation to the crime, but there could be other things like violence and things like that on those hard drives that they often find, from suspects in these types of cases. Do you think they are going to find anything, Daniel, digitally, as far as Brian being connected to maybe being interested in violence or crime and things like that?
I mean, I'm sure there is, but a lot of it probably is with his, studies, or he's going to try to attribute to his studies. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, when I was in law enforcement, you probably see a lot of stuff that I was searching up to that was crime related. And, that's not abnormal, I guess. But I guess maybe some gory stuff. I think that could probably be out. I mean, I don't know, man. That's just speculating. What they could or what they can find. I mean, they can and could find anything. But if there's crime stuff, I think he's going to try to play it off as if, hey, I'm in criminal justice. This is how and why I study this. Mm-hmm. So,
yep. Yeah. I mean, if they were to search my internet history, I'd look like a psycho as well, Daniel, looking into this case for the last year.
Yeah.
They'd be like, what's this guy into? But, all right, let me jump back up here. So the knife, I do think that's just curious, right? Just the way they noted it. Not saying it's the knife, but makes you wonder. So everybody's talked about the book with underlining on page 118. We don't know the book. I've looked at multiple books just out of curiosity and my own kind of digging into the case. I don't know. Have you tried to figure out what book? I think it's impossible, right? And the thing is, with the book, it could just be a book that he's a student. It could be any book where he underlined, something. They are looking for things of relevance to the case, but, I've heard what's it, Elliot Rogers Manifesto and, things like that. I don't see that. I don't believe that is the book. I'd be surprised. I don't know. It could be something, but it could also just, I think, be a psychology book where he underlined, a topic. And I think you brought up a great point, Daniel, as far as explaining away some of these things. If it were to get to that point and just saying, well, hey, I'm studying crime and criminology, right? So yeah, that's why there's this record of me searching how to get away with a crime or, whatever they were to throw at Brian.
Right. Yeah. And that's quite possible.
Yeah. So AT&T bill, we have a Glock 22 Gen 5 40 caliber, very common with law enforcement pistol. I don't know if you know, Daniel, but I did a video on this. It might be a members video, but I looked into this pistol and I actually emailed Glock customer service and figured out. I think he bought the gun in 2020, before the murders, and most likely I'm wondering if we're getting into that security job that he had. Maybe he was looking at armed security. They also recovered in this warrant an application, a permit to I believe right here we have I think it's some sort of application, but it was with the record of the Glock here. So maybe he was applying for a permit there, in regards to his security job. But I did do some research on this, and I believe he bought the gun in 2020 based off of what Glock told me on the serial number. The serial number is actually incorrect on this. I actually had to do some additional digging on that. I'll find that video and post it up, or I'll send it over to you.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So here we go. Smith & Wesson pocket knife. Descriptor there. We have a folder containing vehicle paperwork. And stop me, Daniel, if there's anything here that I kind of brush past that you want to talk more about, that you might have insight on, just let me know. So here's an Acer laptop. Green leafy substance in green container. What do you think that is?
Well, I mean, that's the way everybody in law enforcement describes marijuana. So, right. To me, when it came to this, is this the one where they found the glove inside of a box that had
yes,
the IDs? I think that's probably the most interesting thing that's on here, to be honest with you, just because after that was discovered, right, shortly after that, there was the story that Bryan Kohberger was asked by a female student to put cameras in her home because somebody had broken into her home and moved some things around, and now they were alleging that Bryan Kohberger was probably the guy that did that. And so I wonder if there was some sort of evidence of that, evidence to say, hey, maybe her ID was amongst those INDs. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, why haven't they charged him or this, that, and the third? I mean, you kind of have to prove it, right? And the way you can't prove that he didn't pick it up while he was in there, installing the cameras. Now, she can say, I hadn't seen it since before the cameras were installed. And he can just come back and say, that doesn't mean it was stolen. Then you could have just lost it and I found it. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of back and forth. It's a he said, she said in that aspect. So that's probably a major component as to why they hadn't charged him with that. Plus, they're charging him with quadruple homicide and felony burglary. Yeah. So, and it's funny because like I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, she didn't file a police report," or when I talk about his tires, because if you go and look at the Linda Lane footage, you can see where the car spins the wheel when it's stationary, leaving, which what happens when a vehicle does that, it leaves tire compound on the ground that can then later be matched to the tire. And I hear people say, oh man, well, he changed his tires. And I'm like, why are you hoping he changed his tires? Like wouldn't you, if you truly think he's innocent, wouldn't you want him to keep his tires so you can prove that it wasn't him driving around right there? Or is it that you're wanting, somebody to get away with something? Two different things.
Exactly. Proving your innocence and being acquitted are completely different things, being acquitted on a technicality. But yeah, green leafy substance, I think it is significant if you get into his, his mindset. Now he could have purchased this after the murders. I doubt it. I doubt that he would have started using immediately after the murders. I think this would have been something he probably would have started prior. But in my opinion, it's interesting because he was supposed to have been applying for law enforcement jobs, and if you're applying for those types of jobs, you can't do that, right? And so. Possible he did it afterward after he didn't get the position, but I just think it's interesting as far as kind of some of my other thoughts on where Bryan's life was leading up to the crimes and kind of things, him kind of going full circle to some of the struggles that he had when he was younger. And so I think it's possible that he had he knew he was fooling people, I guess. He's supposed to be trying to get hired at the police, the police station, or, it was a cloud forensic position, but it's still law enforcement. If you're doing those things, I just think that it's interesting as far as his mindset on how seriously he was actually taking, his pursuit of that. My long way of explaining my thought on how to explain that. But right. So here's another green leafy substance plastic bag. So it's, most likely he purchased that at, on his trip home, or a place that. So.
I think his apartment is a little bit more interesting as far as what they found in that one. That one they found a receipt and they found a Dickies tag. Now, at first, initially, I thought maybe it was the tag, like the one that you pull off of a piece of clothing. But what if it was the tag like inside of the shirt? Yeah. Now, there's a couple of reasons somebody would do that. One would be because it's itchy. They don't like it. Another, and I think it was Chris McDonough that brought this point up, that there's an R number and a code on that you can trace that clothing back to where it was actually sold at with that.
Interesting.
And so if you didn't want the clothing to come back to you, you would have to cut that tab, because if he bought it brand new, which according to rumor and speculation or whatever you want to call it, we'll find out in court. I think he believed he purchased that Dickies jumpsuit about 3 or 4 days before the murders.
Yeah.
And it's missing.
Well, and it's a great point, because a tag like that is also something that could be overlooked, right? And not necessarily, like to your point, the tag you cut off, the sticker and the cardboard tag that might come with it. But a tag like that could be something that, in his cleanup process was missed. It's interesting. That's the first time I've heard about that idea of it being the tag from the collar.
Yeah. And he can't take anything with him right from the scene, because that's gonna, he's smarter than that, hopefully. I mean, then again, he made a lot of dumb mistakes, so I don't know.
I don't know how, really quick on that. I mean, we've heard that since the beginning. We all heard PhD, right? We all just imagine, and we know he's smart. There's people who are smart that also have issues, and those issues can be impulsiveness. They can be things that cause them to do things that aren't normal, that aren't logical, right? And make mistakes. And so I really believe that's what is happening here with Brian. I think he was a smart guy. He researched things, but I think in the moment and with everything that was going on in his head, he wasn't fully, he made mistakes,
he made several, and there's a lot of reasonings and whatnots that could go to it. But, if he couldn't take anything with him, right. And well, this is the other thing too. I think one of the reasons maybe made some of the stupid little mistakes is he's trying to cover his track on some of the mistakes that usually catch other people, right? It's not usually this, most people would turn their phone off, before they go and commit a crime. Nobody thinks about cutting the tag off of your shirt. You know what I'm saying? So he's going through all of this planning and things of that nature. I think he's looking over some of the small things that ended up, screwing him over. I mean, and there's tons of evidence of a lot of people that were either rich, smart, had success, and did stupid things. Whether you look at Alex Murdaugh, Ted Bundy, or Aaron Hernandez, the former tight end of the New England Patriots, who was a murderer, and he continued to. I think he's got like 2 or 3 people under, that he's alleged to have committed or killed. And so, and the only reason it's alleged is because he ended up taking his own in prison, awaiting trial. And so now they can't, get the justice they need. And he did that so that his family could end up, I guess, getting his retirement. I guess the New England Patriots didn't have to pay his retirement or pay his salary that they owed him still if he had a conviction or any of these things. And the law there is if somebody dies, you can't prosecute them or whatever. So charges are dropped. And so they were able to give him back his family, all that stuff. Well, anyways, I think that when you look at all the planning that went into it and everything that we know about what happened, I think that there's only a certain kind of person that has the means to do that. You know what I mean? Not your average person is going to be able to go through, think about the tag, think about the cameras everywhere, think about taking a trip so long so that way you evade the traffic, whatever it is that he did, that he didn't get his DNA on the 4 bodies. I don't know. I mean, that's very difficult to do, in my opinion, especially when you don't have the opportunity to clean up. And for those that say that, it was cleaned up, Dylan, Bethany, I mean, those are the same folks that'll say that Dylan and Bethany can clean up that house in 8 hours, but Brian Cooper can't clean up a little car in 7 weeks. Get out of here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, real quick here. Sarah says his mistakes make me think he was using again. I agree. I think there's a very good chance he had relapsed in substance abuse of some sort. Even just alcohol could cause him to go off track there. I agree with that. It's a good segue, Daniel, that you mentioned in regards to, kind of, his behaviors and things. Cause on my thumbnail for the video, I talked about a note from Brian from Montana. So let me just jump over to this one here. So this is item 46 in the warrant from the Pennsylvania House. So a note from Brian from Montana. Just what are your initial thoughts on when you read this? Do my thought here is just, well, before I say, what are your thoughts? A note from Brian from Montana. What does that say to you?
He wrote somebody from Montana. I mean, I would have to look at the contents of the
Right.
letter. I mean, it's odd, to write a letter in today's age with technology and things of that nature, with the ability of text and things like that. So the contents of it is probably heartfelt. I mean, or at least something of that nature.
Yeah.
I
See,
would assume.
and that's my kind of initial thinking is it's usually notes, right, are more personal, right, and they convey something that's a little bit more, detailed. So initially I was thinking, well, Montana has to be a person or a place, right? It's either a note from Brian from Montana. Maybe he was in Montana. Actually, I did a video about a year ago under the theory of Brian was in Montana, maybe for some sort of training, could have been cloud forensic training or something like that. Maybe there was a course up there that was part of his, education. So maybe, a note from Brian from Montana, but then I look at these warrants, right? And again, warrants, they're looking for specific things that are relevant to the case, but it could just be, part of his belongings, just kind of bundled together with, different documents and paperwork that they have. But for whatever reason, it's, they noted it separately, a note from Brian from Montana, where in other cases, they just write medical documents and court documents. And I think at one point they just write, documents that they took, but they specifically note a note from Brian from Montana. So my initial thought was maybe he was in Montana, but then I did find something interesting here. And again, I'm not saying there's a connection, but it's curious. And I think fits Brian really well if you look into this, as far as the behaviors, impulsivity, reckless behavior, substance abuse, lack of remorse after hurting others, deceitfulness, right? He's lied to his friends to take him around to find drugs, irresponsibility, and aggressive behavior. It even goes as far as saying struggling in their education, right? Which Brian was also doing. So I just, again, not to go down the rabbit hole on the psychology piece and trying to diagnose Brian, but I just think this is a very interesting connection here. And I wonder if the note from Brian from Montana could have been an interaction. And remember, there's a lot of witnesses that were interviewed in this case. We've heard of over 100 witnesses that they talked to, and I'm assuming these are probably people who interacted with Brian, right? These are people who would be character witnesses and maybe witnesses in what he was doing after the crime and then leading up to the crime. We don't know, but could she be somebody who interacted with Brian? I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's possible. It makes more sense. Now, can you tell me again the way it's written? Is it note to Brian or note from Brian?
It's a note from Brian from Montana, which is strange. Could it be a note for Brian from Montana or a note from Brian for Montana? Could there? But it's pretty clearly written. Let me pull it back up really quick. But it's interesting, right? It's definitely. I think I agree with you. I think it's a little bit more, makes a little more sense than.
There's been a few students that have come forward, right? And we know that. What do you call it? Certain publications that maybe didn't name these students, but have stated that their sources were students that were in Brian Kohberger's class. Mm-hmm. And they talk about the Brian tally. They talk about, the fact that they were documenting every time Brian was doing something weird or crazy when it came towards women and his professors. And there was, I think one of them had said that there was an issue where he kept asking out a student and was like following or wouldn't take the no for an answer or whatnot. I'm not saying this is her, but for him to keep it too.
Right. Interesting. And, and again, you made a good point when you said a note is typically a little more personal, but here it is. It's that you can see the writing here, note from Brian. It's clearly from Montana. So
what number is it?
Number 46. Let me blow it up a little more.
Yeah.
Here we go. Right here.
Huh.
So who knows? Who knows if there's more? I bet I would bet that there were some student interactions and interactions with other, not just students that Brian graded, but other people on campus. It wouldn't surprise me if Brian had some conflict, or to your point, pursued somebody and
we know he had conflict.
Yeah,
we know he had conflict with John Snyder, the professor. Yep. So he got verbal, and from what I understand, he got almost physical there. I don't know how much of Howard Bloom's book is accurate or not, but he talks about Bryan Kohberger getting pretty angry with his father too.
Yes, yeah, he threatened him when we've heard that he threatened him when he stole his sister's phone. And I think the phrase that I heard was, "Don't do anything stupid." And again, this is just another trait that lines up with all of these behavior things we talk about. When somebody, Richie Rich here said, let me grab this comment. Please stop bringing up his old drug use habits. He changed his life around because he was about to become a professor. I didn't bring it up. They literally found it at his house in Pennsylvania. So we know he was, at a minimum, he was using that drug. It is a drug, whether it's legal or not in some places. But right. He was using again.
Here's the thing, man.
Well, I believe it was. They found it.
Here's the thing. If Bryan Kohberger committed this crime, this happened at 4:00 in the morning on a Sunday morning. I don't know what time he went to sleep on Friday night, going into Saturday, and what time he woke up on Saturday. But if he was up all night, commits the murder, then he goes back, then he drives back to Moscow, then he drives back to Pullman, then he drives down to Clarkston, and then on the way back in Johnson, Idaho, he turns his phone off for about 5 hours again, and then at that point, he gets home about 8:30. I mean, that's a lot of time to be awake, and if he did commit this murder or these murders, that's a lot of force being required, and I don't know. Now you also look at the fact that his own defense team has stated that his runs and his hikes had decreased, and his drives had increased, right? So he wasn't working out as much. If you look at Bryan Kohberger now compared to when he got arrested, the guy looks like he's gained at least 30 pounds, maybe 25.
I was just looking at that today, actually, when I was creating my thumbnail for this live. I was looking at some Brian pictures. I'm like, yeah, you can see it.
Yeah, he's gained significant amount of weight while he's been in jail. Now, stress can do that to you, but when you're stressed out, it's usually from binge eating, and I don't think they're allowing him to binge eat in jail. His diet hasn't changed. He's still vegan, and they're giving him his vegan food. So what's the difference?
Yeah, and it ties in with drug use as well. If he, doesn't now he doesn't have the same access to it that he would have gained some weight, depending on what it was. Any type of amphetamine, could even be prescription. There is a prescription that they collected from his parents' house as well. I'm assuming it would have Brian's name on it. I don't know what prescription it would have been, but maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be illegal drugs. He could be abusing prescription drugs, but going into jail and gaining weight, to your point, that happens as well in those cases.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of folks that are in law enforcement, many who have been jailers and stuff, and especially early on, or maybe not early on, but like not too long ago. It was I had a buddy of mine that came over. He's a police officer in a nearby city, and I had showed him the pictures of Brian Koberger from before and after, and I told him what he was alleged to have done that night. And the guy's like, man, that guy definitely had to have been on something. Had to. I mean, to stay awake like that, even if it's like 55-hour energy shots, which I doubt. But
it's funny. Great minds think alike. I was a video a while back. I was thinking about where he may have gotten rid of the knife and kind of doing the timeline, from leading up to the murders. Again, we don't know what Brian, I think I've mentioned to you, we don't know what Brian was doing in the hours leading up to the murder, say from 5 p.m. until 2:40 a.m. when he leaves. But we don't know how long he was awake for beforehand. But if you kind of map out what he did, and then being seen on camera at Albertsons the next morning, his phone pinging in the King Road neighborhood at 9 a.m. the next morning, just 4 hours after the murders, 5 hours after the murders. I agree with you. I think he was awake for multiple hours there and was running on something.
Yeah, I mean, and given his history, you cannot not look at that.
Yeah.
And then you also look at the horrificness of the crime. I mean, right. I would think that if it did play a role, I'm not saying it did, and there's no way to know, right? I know some people say, hey, did they drug test him when they arrested him? I don't think they do. I've never seen that happen. So I don't know if that happens somewhere else, if Pennsylvania, have their rules a little bit different. But here in Texas, I've never seen anybody get drug tested like that. Now, if they were going to a hospital or they were going to like a mental health facility, then they would get drug tested by the hospital to determine whether or not they were on drugs. And then they had to come off of that and before they were allowed to go and be admitted. But that was about it.
Yep. Yeah. And there could be something, because if you read through the warrant, they are looking for things that, including like prescription drugs and things like that, and things that it even says any alcohol, so things that would alter your mental state, anything like that. And it also kind of supports some of the mistakes that were made, not thinking clearly and not being of clear mind in one way or the other. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richie Rich, for the super sticker. Appreciate it. Richie Rich says, I'm worried they're going to find him and his cell phone and his cell dead and call it a suicide just to cover up the state's bullshit. So you got me thinking, part of me, some people have said I'm crazy, like his personality, he won't do it. He'll fight it to the end, but I could see a guilty plea happening at some point. Depending on, again, we don't know the evidence. I don't know the evidence, but I think it's very, very strong. And I think that right now the defense is fishing for whatever they can and kind of probing and trying to get everything. And they might even have an angle of trying to get the death penalty taken off the table. And that would be a win for them, right? Just to save Brian's life per se. Right. So I do think there's some very strong evidence, and depending on what that evidence is, a receipt for the knife, the DNA on the knife, you put all these things together. How are you going to overcome that? And so, the defense has brought up the death penalty a couple of times in the last couple of hearings. Even the most recent one, they were talking about reserving the right to challenge the death penalty, and the prosecution has a deadline in order to submit their aggravating circumstances to support their pursuit of the death penalty. So there's more to come on that topic, I think, as we get closer. But I want it to go to trial. I want to see, the insights there and go and let the process work its way out. But I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting, man. I know that from what I heard, this is just hearing things. You know what I'm saying? Well, let me put it this way. I've heard it from multiple places, including the Gonzalez family. And what they told me was that, police have told them, we know that there's a gag order, so we can't tell you anything. There's so much evidence against them. It is a solid case. There's no way he's going to get out of this. And so, it's one person's word versus another, but being somebody that was in the profession, That's not something you usually promise people. You know what I'm saying? Unless there's some pretty slam dunk evidence. And, you know, I think there is going to be some. I mean, I talked just mainly about the tires and him turning the wheel. I know somebody said, you know, did he change his tires though? I don't know if he did. I know he stopped at a place to get his maintenance done and his oil changed, but I'm not sure if he had his tires changed or not. And if he did, it's not hard to track down those tire changing places and to get that taken care of. Now, when I was growing up, I worked at Walmart when I was young, and I worked in the automotive department with the tires and stuff. Now things may have changed from then, but you know, the tire place used to come in about once a month, maybe once every 2 months, to collect all the tires and go and dispose of them. So if he did this after he got over there to Pennsylvania or on his way to Pennsylvania, it was only about he was there the 16th. They found out who he was the 20th. So they probably had eyes on that area. They probably figured out that he went and did that by the 24th. So you mean you're looking at maybe just a little bit over a week. And I think you can probably be able to find those. It's not going to be very difficult.
Yep. Thank you, Keeping It Real, for the super sticker. One of the first ones here on the live tonight. I saw you checking the time earlier. I'm glad you found it on time here. Good to see you. All right, there was another thing I wanted to run by you that I was reading through on the warrant for Brian. I don't know if I need to really pull it up here, but it's I'll just talk through it. But they describe how Brian was seen entering. Here we go. Let me see if I'm on the right page. They describe how Brian was entering. Yeah, let me blow this up. I believe it's here. All right. So it says investigators began physical surveillance of the property in the area of Brian's parents' house. And in the early morning hours of Tuesday, the 27th, they observed Brian walking near his residence. And then it says, additionally, Kohberger's vehicle was observed entering the Indian Mountain Lakes development on December 16th. And the vehicle is still believed to be on the premises. And then it goes on to say that on the 28th, while conducting surveillance, investigators observed Kohberger traveling throughout Monroe County and arriving back at his residence on Lambston Drive. But it doesn't say that on the 28th he was driving the white Elantra. And so this got me wondering and thinking, did Brian stick the white Elantra in the garage on December 16th and leave it there and stop driving it? And was he trying to hide the white Elantra?
That's interesting. That would be interesting.
Because they don't mention that he's driving.
Can you blow it up a little bit bigger?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm horrible about some of this here. Can you see that?
Yeah. It says
right
Wednesday.
Right here where it says furthermore.
Okay, and it says Tuesday, 27th, observed walking. It says his vehicle was observed entering on the 16th, and the vehicle is still believed to be on the premises. Yeah, he probably did park it somewhere and then started using somebody else's.
Yeah, because they mentioned they believe it's in the garage. So it makes me think he was just another behavior, right? That was he parking that and trying to clean it up in the garage? Maybe he was in there, scrubbing it, wiping it down, all that stuff.
Quite possible. I mean, I had a medical legal forensic death investigator on the show, and we went through some of the claims or whatever that you can think of when it came to the DNA, when it came to blood, the footprint, Brian Kohberger not having DNA in the car. And she has a master's in forensics and science and stuff like that. Her job is basically she supervises the CSI type stuff, and then I think she does like not autopsies, but kind of something like that. Well, anyways, she said that it is not that difficult to clean up a vehicle like that. And she brought up some interesting points. She said, first and foremost, you have to think about the what you're going to be doing, right? You're going to be driving somewhere and you potentially could have some evidence on you. So you're going to want to cover some things. You're going to want to cover everything that touches you, and you're going to want to limit what you touch inside of the car. And I was like, yeah, that's true. You know, you're going to put the seatbelt behind the seat, buckle it in there, probably cover it with plastic and this, that, and the third. And I know people will say, man, well, if he got pulled over with all that stuff, he would have gotten in trouble. It would have been obvious what he was going to do. Well, if he got pulled over with blood all over him too, it would have been obvious as well. So, you know, he wasn't going to get pulled over that night. Now, you know, if he did those things right, he covered the steering wheel, protected the brake and gas pedal, covered anything that he would normally touch, right? And then that's also saying that he went in there with the bloody clothes on. I think it's been rumored that Bethany saw somebody without clothes running, right? I think police also speculate that he removed that jumpsuit before entering his vehicle. You know, if you're taking off the shoes, you're taking off the jumpsuit, you have a towel there, you wipe yourself before you get into the car, and you put that all in a bag. How long do you think that would take you to do, first and foremost? Maybe a minute, tops.
If that, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you get all that off of you, and you put that into like a plastic bag. And I mean, you only have to wash a few things. Nobody was actively bleeding inside that car. For there to be blood in the tiny little creases of everything, like that only happens if somebody got stabbed in the car or somebody was bleeding in the car, where you know, every little piece, any crevice somewhere back there, you're gonna find something. That doesn't happen with somebody who enters a car and there's nobody bleeding there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.